You are watching Lesson 3 for Fall 2020 of the Dance of the Eye and the Hand for continuing students.
Welcome back. Today we're going to continue working on the painting I call A Hope for Peace. And in today's demonstration I will first show beginning to build the structure of the painting with the rocks, then with trees, then with lighter trees and even lighter trees, and then begin to do some of the washes and ink accumulation, building up layer upon layer upon layer. And so today we'll look at building layers and ink accumulation and what happens when you start putting ink down, letting it dry, adding more, letting it dry, adding more. Next time I will continue with that demonstration and we'll move on to more deeply into exploring dots and mists as well in the next 2 weeks. So let's get started. So we have our model here for A Hope for Peace, and based on what we just reviewed in terms of structure and just dissecting a painting, removing everything that you think comes before the beginning. I'm going to prep my brush here. I'm using a good full black, not too wet. And I'm going to start looking at this. I see one form of rock, a second, a third, a fourth, and a fifth. So I'll start with what I would consider the host rock, leaving enough room here for that bridge and the shoreline. And I'll start on the top. And I'm using a little bit of the side of the brush. I want a nice strong line that goes off the page. And I consider this the host rock, so it is in front. The second one is behind it. And then there's a third one over here. And all these lines I want to go boldly off the page to increase the size of my paper. The fourth one, and then a little flat one way on the end here that just closes that corner for us. Then I'll put in some shading lines. I'll use the side of my brush. There's some that come fairly high, and I'm using a pretty dry brush to do this. And again, I'm just doing the first layer here. There'll be more that will come later. So this is just sort of the base of it. This one doesn't have any shading on it. So that's where I began with the rocks. Then I'm going to focus on the black trees, and starting as close to the front as I see them. This one comes in right near the front of the page. And again, I'm going to build it like we would any other tree, looking for that first V and then working out from there. These are black lines, not too wet, but as strong as you can make them. So not just flying off like a orchid branch, orchid leaf might, but having some sense of connection. And I want these a little blacker. This is getting a little bit too dry. I don't want them to disappear. I want them to be strong. And again, take as much time as you need to stare at the piece, to dissect all its parts. And part of this is about isolation. And if it's helpful to cut a square out on a sheet of paper and just lay it over there so you're only looking at the section that you're focused on, do that. Whatever tools you need to help you dissect and decipher are helpful. But I'm continuing just looking at my model, and because of the amount of layers I'm going to be putting on this, I do want to be sure my lines are strong and the ink is strong. I don't want too much flying white or gray at this point. We'll come to more gray later on, but at this point I need to have it strong and dark, because we're going to be piling wash and dots and just so many layers on top of this that will obscure the structure, that I need to be sure my structure is as strong as I can make it. That may also involve just slowing down. I don't need to go too fast. I can do this slowly. And as a way to pace yourself, just know that spending as much time just staring at the piece is as important as actual painting. So don't shortchange yourself in terms of how much time or how little time you spend actually looking. And I painted this in 2002, so that was 18 years ago. And I don't know how many additional times I've painted this piece. So it's a piece that I know, not by heart, but I have a familiarity with its structure. And that certainly is helping me move a little more swiftly than you will at first try. So we'll just go across the sheet and trying to imagine, and some of it is using your imagination, because you're not going to clearly see all that's in here, because at some points the washes and the dots are totally obscuring the structure. So at some point you do have to just make it up. But whether you make it up or whether you're actually seeing the structure, in either case, there needs to be a structure there. Just a moment, let me let the dog out. So we're continuing with these black, strong trees that go boldly off the page. And even though they are thin lines, the lines I would think more like, if you will, bamboo, in that they need to have a beginning, a moving, and an ending to them. They're not just going off the page boldly outward. And we come down to this other corner. Must be getting to be fall because this brush is drying out more quickly than it has all summer. So I think we're beginning to lose some of our humidity. I'm just going back, adding a little more complexity here, thickening up a bit. So I've done my first layer of trees. Then I'm going to make myself a little bit of a gray wash, just taking my full ink, diluting it in water, drying my brush, loading it a little bit, but loading it throughout the brush, testing it, just a little bit more. So what I just did here was load a brush with wash, dry it quite a bit, then just reload the tip. So I'm starting with a foundation of gray and then drying it and then loading the tip so it's a little bit wet in the tip, and then I'm going to start again and I'm looking deep into this and seeing where do I see gray trees in here, and adding a second layer of gray. And I'm starting first with what I would call a middle gray, fairly dark. And here, because of the washes and that, I don't have to go all the way to the base of the page. And with the gray ones, I'm doing it a little bit lighter touch so I get a little more broken line to it, because they're fading more into the background and their base of them is fading into the background. But I still want to go back, thicken this up. And I know sometimes we talk about when we're doing dots, and we have some of our dots are what I would call show-off dots. This top part of the gray layer I might call show-off strokes as well. You want to put a little more energy into them because they'll be more of a highlight. And again, down here, all I'm doing is just trying to thicken it up, add a little more complexity to the structure. And by using a little quicker touch, I actually get a shade or two lighter in the gray. And I'm going to do just a little bit lighter with my gray. And just continue to work my way to the right or to the left here, adding some more just to thicken it up behind. And over here I'm coming, this is one I want to be a little more careful with, so it goes on the end. And again, behind the rock here, I just want to add a few more to add some structure to it, add some density. Then we have 2 layers of trees. We have our black and the gray. So next, I'm going to focus on the a gray wash, and I think, let's see, that's going to be too gray. Let's pour a little of that off, add a little more water to this gray. Again, wash our brush into it. What I was experiencing here as I went was, because I had not washed my brush out from the ink, that the gray just got progressively darker the longer I painted. So if you want to avoid that, one way to do that is to just wash your brush out and start clean. So now I have a nice kind of mid gray. I'm going to start doing some of the wash, and I'm going to start first with these rocks, and I'm going to put again some more shading lines into it, using a little bit of the side of the brush so I get more of a scraping. I'm not just putting down a flat wash, but I can, as I go down, press at the bottom, because I want this bottom area to be solid. If we're talking about open and close, this is closed at the base. And then I dry my brush a little bit and I can feather a little bit more, just really scraping on the side using that flat tip. And then we have another one here. These are dry strokes, and I'm pressing as I go down just to thicken that out, fill it in, close that area. And again, a little bit of feathering, but focused on really taking out the white at the base of the page. Here, this whole rock is almost in gray, not totally, as is this one. And the last one over here stays as it is. So we can continue with our layers. And I'm going to put some gray wash behind these rocks. Kind of feathery, but I'm really just taking out a lot of the white behind the rocks so that the rocks will pop. And as I go upward, I can use the side of my brush, really just sort of scraping. I can see sort of the shape, almost echoes the shape of the rocks, but I'm using just the side of the brush to get some shading in. Not covering everything and not working too much too fast. Just getting sense of some blurring of the image. Then I'm going to switch gears here, let that dry a bit. And as we begin to do layers, we want to let the layers dry in some cases. In some cases we'll work them wet, but one reason to let them dry is so that what the base that I've put down is stable, and then I can add on top of it, which will give it a thicker sense. So I'm going to shift gears. I'm going to focus on this little bridge over here, and starting with the top of it, and I have a fairly dry brush. I want these to be strong strokes. And it sort of has a little bit of a lift to it, and then down and off the page. And I'll leave a place to put the figure in, which I will do later. I want to strengthen this just a bit. Then I have a leg. and another leg. I'll make it a little more ink. And then one that's on the other side. And another one that's on the other side. A little cross piece. Another cross piece. And then down at the end, I will do another leg, shorter leg, and a cross piece. And later on, then I will add my figure, and then as I add more wash, this will go into the wash. So while I still have some black in my brush, I think I'll do some of these grasses. More of a calligraphy stance. I want these strokes strong. Doesn't matter if I go up or down, just go with what feels like your strongest direction. And we'll leave that at that. Now I want to move on to beginning my dots, and I'm going to start with the gray dots, I think. No, I'm going to start with the black dots. That's what my directions tell me. So, loading up my brush. And these are pretty wet dots. So I'm just going to press. Let's get a little more moisture in here. I want to be able to press and have it flood or flow. I want these to be pretty wet dots. Here we go. And to some degree, I am now obscuring what the structure that I had made. And some of these can be rounder than others. Some of them are pretty flat. Again, starting at down near the base, thickening it up. In some cases, I'm going over what I started with, and in some cases, I'm just taking out more of the white. But there's sort of, if we think about things being gathered or scattered, in some ways, most of these are more scattered. Sometimes I just pause, let it bleed a little bit, and shortly I will shift to doing more of gray dots. These again I'm doing with a little more punch or energy to them because I will consider these to be more of show-off dots. And I'm dipping into my grayer wash at this point, going from black dots to more of a gray. And still trying to take out, even with the gray, taking out more of the white that's at that base. I can add some of those gray dots to the base of the rocks as well. Take some of that moisture out and go even lighter. A little bit of thickness here, but also this is going to dry lighter. I'm raising my my wash line higher, thickening this up. And really what you're painting is sort of a mist, a blur. I'm gonna just dip my brush in water because I want to go just a bit lighter. So without changing the brush per se, I can change the tone by just sticking the brush in some water. And again, since I'm not starting with a fresh brush, the longer I go with this, the darker the dots will get, because it's going back to whatever I had loaded the brush with, which was a middle gray. Some of my lightest, and embedding some of those darker ones into the light ones. Almost pure wash or pure water at this point. There's very little ink in it, but what I'm doing is just blending, making it transform from darker to lightest. And in this area at the end of this, when we're done, there will be very little white left. Don't want to totally take it out, but I do want it to read fairly strongly, fairly thickly. And I will stop shortly here, and what I will do is let this dry and see how much of it dries back, and perhaps add a whole other layer to that. So then I think it's time to tackle this little figure here. And I'm going to use my detail brush, smaller brush. I'm going to use black ink, but I don't want a lot of ink on it. I don't want to get a flood. So where do we start? First thing would be take another test sheet and do it maybe, I don't know, 2-3 times on the side before you commit. So I'm going to start with the head, which is a simple circle that has this detail on the back. I need a little more. This I want quite black. Then I have sort of the chest, sleeve, full sleeve, and then a little bit of back. More of the back goes quite some ways down. I believe he's wearing a robe. And then under the sleeve, top of the robe. And another fold there. And then he seems to be holding the staff. A little bit of head on it, lift a bit. This you want in a good, strong black. And then if I want, I could bring up these lines to it. So there's my figure. Now, we'll move on to the sky. The sky is done in washes. Let's see what I have in my brush right now. I can start with that. I'm going to start on the right side and just kind of, with more of the side of the brush, bring a rough line over, lift as I go. Add some more water to that to lighten it up so I get more of a bleeding wash. Stroking it using the side of the brush here a couple of times, going even lighter. Dry it, pull some more, get a little bit of dryness here. I will press so I get some of this bleeding together. Some more lines drifting off. Wanted to get some dryness as I lift. And then in this corner there's just a bit of sort of shadow to close that side of the sky. And then this I will need to let dry.
Before you go, one last note. The handouts for the Dance of the Eye and the Hand for beginning students and continuing students, all lessons, are posted as downloadable PDFs at www.laughingwatersstudio.com. Have a good day. You have been watching Distance Learning from Laughing Waters Studio.